On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story. I woke up one morning and I was in the worst of moods. It wasn't just a bad mood, I was sad. There was a picture of Kenny on my nightstand. I looked at it and the tears just started flowing. For the first time in a while, I cried over losing him. I didn't just cry, I sobbed. If not for the fact that Shalonda was expecting me, I would certainly have skipped school that day. But I didn't want to let her down. I drove to her bus stop, feeling like something was pulling at my heart the entire time. I was just sad, miserably sad. When I arrived, Shalonda opened the door with a smile. She sat on the passenger side and threw her book bag into the back seat. "Happy Wednesday," she said. And then it occurred to me. It was Wednesday. With no conscious effort on my behalf, my heart was sad for Kenny because that would have been our day, if not for the fact that life had gotten into the way. But there was something else. I looked into Shalonda's eyes. I saw her smile, and I heard her voice. And for no reason other than the fact that she was there, the heaviness in my heart lessened. It was like someone had taken a ton of bricks off of my chest and I could suddenly breathe. It was a literal, physical reaction. At that very moment, I understood something. Shalonda wasn't just someone that I had met. She was sent to me for a very specific purpose. There was a reason why I was so drawn to her. It was the reason why she, out of every girl that I had ever met, wouldn't stop playing around in my head. Shalonda was intended to be the other part of me. How could she have softened my heart like that otherwise? Chapter 13, 18, narrated by Shandora Warren, music by Epidemic Sound. Things started looking up for me. Since I wasn't riding around with Hot Boy, I started to get my own clientele. Business was booming. As a result, Rob decided to bump me up. Not like all the way up. He was just letting me sell a little cocaine here and there. But my money was looking good. Hot Boy was still selling weed, even though he had been there longer and was basically like a son to Rob. Hot Boy didn't seem to care though. I got the feeling that he was just comfortable. It was a way of life for him, not really about the money. Hot Boy loved to be around Mike and Tommy. He called them Uncle Mike and Uncle Tommy. He laughed at their jokes and asked them to tell him stories about when they were coming up with Rob. They were Rob's big guys, and Hot Boy had basically been around them his whole life. It was the same with Lorenzo and Mac. They were in their 20s and were like older brothers to Hot Boy. They talked about girls and wrestled. They were real family-ish. I was that way with them to a certain extent, but I had a life outside of the pack. The rest of them didn't really seem to. I was there when I was there, but when I wasn't, I wasn't. Me and Shalonda got over the whole cheating scandal. To make sure that we could see each other, she'd page me when her parents were asleep. I'd call her back and let her know whether I wanted her to sneak out or if I wanted her to sneak me in. When I snuck in, I'd crawl in through her window and we'd have sex in her bathroom. She probably thought it was just about the sex, but it wasn't. Maybe it would have been if she was somebody else. But it was all tied together with Shalonda. When I was with her, something was good in life, at least one thing. In the beginning, we stuck to Wednesdays, but then, life. I now realize that Shalonda was a crutch for me. Everything was better when I was with her. It took years for me to understand how unfair that probably was to her. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I just felt like I needed her. When everything was out of order, she was my safe space. I needed her to continue to be that for me. And when life started lifing, I needed it a little bit more. That was a lot of responsibility for her. Pops got out of jail at the beginning of July. He had been locked up for 2 years. Luckily, Ma's possession charge had been thrown out, so she didn't have to serve any time. Unfortunately, she let Pops move right back into the house. Also, unfortunately, he came back on that same mess. Now, this is the thing. A lot had changed since Pops had been gone. I was about to turn 16 when he left. Kenny had just died and I was depressed. I had gotten kicked out of school and everything was crumbling around me. Since that point, I had started selling for Rob, served my own bid in juvie, and had stepped up to fill in where Kenny had left off. I was about to turn 18. Pops was not about to come home and parent me, but that's what he tried to do though. Fresh out of jail, Pops wanted to have a family meeting with me and Ma. He sat us down at the kitchen table and said, "Alright, I've been gone for 2 years, but ain't a thing in these streets that ain't hit my ears. I'ma tell both of y'all that Rob is bad business. Now, ain't nothing I could do about what was going on when I was away, but now I need y'all to cut all this out." I looked at Ma, and her face was saying something. I couldn't figure out what it was though. I understood 100% why Pops was advising me to stay away from Rob. He had obviously heard that I was selling for him and they didn't have the most pleasant history. But Ma, what was her connection to Rob? As far as I knew, they had only been into contact when Rob gave her the money to bond me and Hot Boy out of jail. Ma jumped into the conversation, but I felt like she was saying what needed to be said opposed to the truth. She said, "Rob looked out while you were gone. We ain't all get 3 free meals. We had to do what we had to do." Pops laughed. "Oh yeah?" he said. "That help looks real funny." "Well said, Ma. Looks can be deceiving. Just because a chicken has wings, don't mean it can fly." I was over all the small talk. I had something to do. I went straight to Rob. "Hey man, what you doing with my mama?" Rob laughed, which ticked me off. I repeated the question. "No, really, what you doing with my mama?" Rob, being the cool and reserved person that he was, said, "I don't discuss your business with your mama, and I don't discuss your mama's business with you." Let me tell you something. If Rob was some little nigga on the street, I would have taken my chances with him. But the fact was, I wasn't going to try Rob, and both of us knew it. I looked at Rob and said, "Look, I ain't trying to put you in an uncomfortable spot, but that's my mama. And me and you, we better than that, ain't we?" Rob paused for a second, and then he decided to level with me. He said, "Alright, little man, when you got locked up, Hot Boy called Tommy to get y'all out. I ain't want to send him down there because I knew they'd be looking, and I ain't want to get them hot. That's why I gave your mama the money to get y'all out. That's when we first came into contact. After you got locked up, she hit me up because she was in a tight squeeze. She wanted to know if I had some money that belonged to you. I didn't, of course, but I gave her some just to look out. After that, I let her make some drops here and there. I know you probably don't like that, but ain't nothing free." "Wait a minute. I know you ain't think I was hitting your mama. No offense, but you already know she ain't in my type, la man." I breathed a sigh of relief. All I knew was Pop seemed to think that there was something funny about the way Ma and Rob were dealing, and Ma looked real guilty. We both laughed. After we chuckled about it for a minute, Rob made sure to put the situation into perspective. He said, "Listen, la man, I understand you feeling like you need to know some things, and it takes a man to stand up and ask the hard questions. Don't ever try to be that man with me no more, though. That's your one." He went from laughing with tears in his eyes to warning me with a completely straight face. And guess what? I knew he was serious. I turned 18 in July, and life was good. All of the bills were caught up in the house. Ma was working full-time, so I assumed she wasn't making drops for Rob anymore. I was making good money and putting some away. Me and Shalonda were doing our thing, and I had leveled up with her. By that point in time, we had far surpassed the Wednesday thing. I basically come to her window whenever I wanted, and she let me in. I felt like I had everything that I wanted, but things were about to blow up. Big time. It was August, and I was out doing my regular thing, driving and such. It was around 6:30, and I realized that I hadn't eaten anything since earlier in the day. I decided to stop by a fast food restaurant to grab something. I ordered my food, then made my way through the line. Just as I was about to exit the parking lot, I noticed a heavy police presence to my left. For the most part, I had a tendency to mind my business when it came to the police. If they weren't messing with me, I definitely wasn't looking for them. But it was unavoidable in that case. I looked over and realized that it was Ma's car. The whole scene was chaotic, so I couldn't really see what was going on, but it was definitely her car. I thought to myself, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? I had a few bags of weed and some cocaine in the car. I parked around the corner, locked the doors, then walked back to the restaurant. By the time I got back, everything was in an uproar. I passed Pops in the back of one of the police cars. Ma was standing outside. She was in handcuffs, and I could hear her yelling and crying. I ran towards her saying, "Hey, what y'all doing? Take them cuffs off of my mama." Ma turned towards me a little, and I could see that her face was all bloody. Between sobs, she said, "I'm so sorry you had to see this, Kenny baby." I rushed towards the officers. "Yo, what y'all do to her?" By that point, I saw a familiar face walking towards me. It was the officer that had stopped me that night when I got caught driving with my learner's permit. The same officer who had showed up after Kenny got killed. He was a young black guy. I got the feeling that he understood me and he wanted to intervene before things went too far. He signaled for the other officers to step back. "I got it," he said. The officer asked me to step over to his car. He explained that Ma and Pops had been involved in a heated argument which had escalated into an actual fist fight. When the police showed up, Ma and Pops got out of the car. They continued to push each other around, and even though no one saw where it came from, a bag of crack fell onto the ground. Upon searching the car, the officers found more. "They're both going to jail," he said. Hearing the story, I felt like I knew what was going on. I told the officer, "Look, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but this is easy." It was his. The officer looked at me, and I could tell that he didn't want to say what he was about to say. He put his hands on my shoulder and said, "We found some on your father, but we also found some in your mother's purse." In my mind, that was easy too. She was making drops for Rob, but I couldn't say that, of course. "What I gotta do?" I asked. The officer asked how old I was. 18, I said. He told me to come down to the police station and he'd let me know if they could be bonded out. In my mind, all of that was easy too. Pops was a convicted felon and the aggressor in the fight against Ma. Her face made it obvious that he had put his hands on her. He'd most likely not get a bond. Even if he did, I wouldn't bother with trying to get him out. Pops wasn't my concern. Ma, on the other hand, had a pretty clean record. Maybe I could talk her into saying that the crack belonged to Pops. My plan was to bond her out and try to talk her into it, but nothing turned out the way I thought it would. I got to the jail and waited to talk to the officer. When he came out, he was shaking his head. I knew something was wrong. "What happened?" I asked. The officer said, "I think you may be in the dark about some things regarding your mother. They're not going to give her a bond for a few reasons. Your mother has a pending case from last month for drug possession. She bonded herself out the last time and is awaiting her court date. It doesn't look good that she has the exact same charges a month later. But there's something else. I showed up a little late to the scene today, so I wasn't aware of all the details when I talked to you. Your parents weren't just involved in a fight. They were involved in a fight over drugs. They had both been doing drugs and were extremely high when the officers arrived. Apparently, that had been the case when your mother was arrested the last time too, only she was by herself that time. At this point, it's not just the possession. She was in the driver's seat when the officers showed up, so she caught a charge for driving under the influence. Even though she was the one with the bloody face, they both pushed each other in front of an officer, so they're both facing assault charges. And to round it out, there's public intoxication. In the short version, she's not going home, probably not for a while. I was 18 and I was left to take care of myself, but that was secondary. So let me get this straight. Ma was smoking crack? The same Ma who was mad that Pops was selling crack in her house. The same Ma who went off because Pops was smoking crack in the bathroom that time. And she had been arrested a month prior without me ever knowing about it. I thought about it. Deep down, I knew it was true. I mean, it made sense. I reflected back to the look that Ma had when I showed up. She turned her face a little, but it was as if she didn't really want me to see her. And then I thought about her wording. She said, "I'm so sorry you had to see this, Kenny baby." At the time, I thought she was just tripping. Being under duress can cause you to do and say some crazy things. But she called me Kenny baby. Kenny and I had basically lived in the same house with Mom for 15 years. And even though our names were near replicas, she never mixed them up. Sometimes she called him Kenny. Sometimes she called him Kenny baby. But she never called me anything other than Ken. How high did she have to be to call me Kenny baby? Especially since Kenny had been dead for over 2 years by that point. Everything was swirling around in my mind, and I kept wondering, what did I miss? How did this happen? I wondered if Pops had somehow gotten Ma to try it with him. Or maybe she was making a drop for Rob and got curious. I didn't know. But either way it went, Ma was in big trouble, and I had to help her. I talked to a lawyer, and he told me what she was up against. He also told me how much it was going to cost for him to represent her. Neither of those things looked good, but I had to do what I had to do. At that point, it was absolute tunnel vision. My life consisted of hustling, stacking money, and trying to make sure that Ma was okay. It was stressful, and the more stressful it got, the more I depended on Shalonda to be there for me. I started going to her window more often, to the point where she just left it unlocked and allowed me to come in whenever I wanted. Honestly, I kind of set it up that way. I boxed her in, but I needed to. This is the thing. Through dealing with Shalonda, I watched how easily she could be convinced to bend the rules. I knew how strict her parents were. Even still, I was able to talk her into sneaking on the phone, riding with me to school, skipping school, having sex, meeting me at the park with her little sister with her, and anything else. I was the first guy that Shalonda had ever been with, so she didn't know anything else. But what would happen if somebody else came along? Could they convince her too? So I made sure that she understood that my visits were unpredictable. If she didn't know when I was going to pop up, she wouldn't take the chance of having someone else around. It was that easy. Like I said, no one else was going to have her. And considering everything that was going on in my life, that was the wrong time for anyone to try. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with family, friends, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.